getting started in just a minute. Once everyone kind of settles in with Zoom and audio and all of that. If you have any audio challenges, you could put questions into the chat there, and we'll hopefully have some interaction, some questions near the end. If you are comfortable, I do encourage you to go on video. I love seeing people as I'm speaking as part of that. And if any questions come up along the way, feel free to jump in or add them into the chat. And yeah, just as people in the waiting room sort of get settled in and entered in, then we'll kick it off.
All right, thanks, Jay. I see we've stabilized at in terms of our number of participants, so why don't we kick this thing off? Good morning, everyone. My name is Bruce Matthews. I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies Ontario, and I've been a professional engineer for about 33 years now. And on behalf of ACEC Ontario, I'm pleased to provide some introductory comments and perspective for this National Engineering Month session, Beyond Engineering, the Skills Needed to Navigate Technical Change. Engineers are problem solvers by nature. They plan and analyze, design, and support implementation to create a better world. Engineering exists at the intersection of scientific principles and design principles. In order to solve the grand social, environmental, and economic challenges of today, one requires knowledge, skill, and judgment driven by design and driven through an understanding of the underlying science. But our understanding of those principles and the tools available to engineers in applying those principles are constantly evolving. The only constant is change. The second law of thermodynamics, which most of you hopefully will be aware of, tells us that change is inevitable, and in the absence of input and controls, that change tends toward disorder and chaos. And this is true for physical systems as well as socioeconomic systems. And the potential impact of that change is such that engineers can't sit in a silo of technical knowledge and expect to succeed. I moderated a NEM session last week examining the front lines of engineering practice, the work of consulting engineers. And it was clear from our panelists that engineering practitioners need more than technical knowledge. Communication skills, oral and written, but also listening, project management skills, relationship management, business acumen. All these things are going to be essential going forward in this constantly changing world. And we'll hear more about that in this morning's session. The theme of this week in National Engineering Month is lifelong learning. One of ACEC Ontario's goals is to enhance awareness of the importance of continuing professional education and development. Your undergraduate engineering degree is the first step to a PEng license, but the PEng license is not a final destination. It's a license to learn, the first step on a journey of personal and professional growth that never stops. The engineering regulator in Ontario, PEO, has introduced mandatory continuing professional development for professional engineers as of January this year. In response, ACEC Ontario has launched engineeringcpd.ca, a platform offering short courses across a broad range of relevant subjects available to everyone, not just our ACEC Ontario members. ACEC Ontario is proud to be a champion-level partner in National Engineering Month, and I invite you to learn more about ACEC Ontario and our member companies through our website, acecontario.ca. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Jay from Goldfin Consulting to get the session underway. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bruce. I really like that framing of trying to avoid some chaos as we go through change. I'd like, maybe we can change some of the work that we do from change management to chaos management. Sometimes I think it feels like that a little bit. So thank you everyone for joining today. As Bruce mentioned, I'm Jay Mullen. I'm a partner and director of programs and operations at Goldfin Consulting. I'm really excited to be here as part of National Engineering Month and talking about some of those skills that we use and that I think are really important to engineers to help their teams, their organizations navigate technical change. Now, before we dive into that though, I do have a question for everyone. So if you could take your browser or your phone, and if you could go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter the code at the top of the screen there. That's 33068960. And just tell me some non-engineering skill that you're most proud of. It could be, some other work or professional or academic related skill, or something totally unrelated to professional life, like hobbies or something like that. I know one funny one that I often use this is I'm really good at cutting bread. Very even, straight lines. I've been complimented on this. I don't practice cutting bread. It's something that sort of came out of practicing woodworking stuff, but that's sort of my random skill that I'm maybe a little oddly proud of on there. So we see persuasion. Oh, we've already got some good persuasive people here, so that's good. Time management, empathy, mentorship. Oh, these are excellent. Man, my bread cutting one is not really standing up to this. Music, great. So what we're going to be talking about today, I love seeing all these different answers popping up here, is what are some of those different skills that we may need to develop. And I think Bruce in the intro highlighted on a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So jumping into that in terms of today's agenda, I'm going to start with framing a challenge, a big challenge that's going to require some technical change, but then look at some of those non-technical skills that are going to be needed to meet that challenge. And lastly, cover a little bit of advice, guidance, sources of how to work on developing those skills. The map that you see that we're kind of following through here, just for interest's sake, this is a map of Canada's deepest cave, Bissaro Anima in BC. So we're going to get deep into some of those communications and other skills. Before diving into it, Goldfin, we are a specialized engineering consulting firm that helps organizations improve energy management practices, reduce emissions, save money. And our expertise really is combining that technical engineering knowledge with an understanding of change management, adult learning, organizational management best practices to help us build capacity within the organizations that we work with to meet those challenges around energy management and climate change. Which brings us to the challenge that I'm going to focus on today. So a lot of what we talk about is going to be applicable to a whole range of situations involving technical change, but I'm going to be focused on one that we work with day in and day out, and that is around climate change. So meeting the challenge of climate change represents an unprecedented transition, and we're talking about a huge change in how buildings operate, how industrial processes work, how organizations are managed. So we're talking about, in the next couple of decades, organizations are trying to reduce their GHG emissions by 80 to 90%. So going back to Menti now, I'd like to hear from you of what technical challenges might arise as organizations try to reduce those GHG emissions. So thinking about industrial facilities, commercial, institutional, hospitals, universities, what are some of those technical barriers, those technical challenges that we need engineers and that engineering skill set to overcome? And this may be, things that you've seen through your own work or aware of and through the news or other things you've been following through your studies. So there's going to be a lot of technical challenges around here, sourcing materials, Range of solutions, right? It's not like we find the silver bullet and then we're good to go, right? There's going to be a lot of different things for different instances and a mix of solutions. Where will the power come from? Exactly. There's not just I mentioned those building sides, but going along with that, there's the whole grid infrastructure, the energy infrastructure behind all of that, transportation's reducing costs, qualifying new solutions, quantification just on the analytics side and getting better information around it for sure. And some big challenges in changing those processes and materials that we're using. There's going to be a lot. And like we can go down into the stuff of, how do you convert a high temperature gas fired system to a low temp air source heat pump? And there's a lot of very specific technical challenges and building specific things that may go into that as well. So there's no shortage of technical challenges. I think that's a really exciting time to be in engineering of getting through this big change. But beyond that, what are some non-technical challenges that might arise? So thinking of those technical challenges, changing those industrial processes, the materials, the grid, what are non-technical challenges that companies are going to have to overcome, either to help implement some of those technical solutions or address those, to remove barriers to addressing those, or anything else? Does anyone have any ideas on some of those non-technical challenges that may impede the success in achieving our targets, or stand in the way, present some barriers? Okay, getting some good answers here. We've got getting buy-in and support. I've seen just even in the last 3 years or so, I've seen a big change in terms of that buy-in and commitment, but I think there's a long way to go across the different organizations, but even within organizations, getting that understanding. Elitism that engineers know best, but we do, don't we? Attitude, funding, communicating the problem, the need for action. Exactly. I think these are good. We see a lot of these. I joked about the elitism one, but as a consultant, we come into organizations and there's often a lot of resistance from someone coming into your organization and telling you what you should be doing, just by the nature of that relationship and how that plays out. So I think that's a big issue. And logistics, maintaining relationships, marketing as well, possibly communicating. These are great. And I think we're going to touch on a lot of these issues today. And I love seeing these different ideas. And looks like everyone's already sort of on board with that. So I think those are really great. We saw a lot of great non-technical challenges. And I think from those, a sense of some of those skills that are going to be needed, communications, marketing, getting buy-in around things. So what I want to do now is I want to take a look at some examples of those skills. So the ones I'm going to talk about today, there were other ones on there like funding. I'm not going to talk about financing, or, there's legal issues that need to be addressed as well. I'm going to focus on skills that could fall under that sort of bigger umbrella of communication, but they are specialized. They have their niches. They have their own skill sets that are involved in it. I want to look at some examples of how those skills can be used to overcome a lot of the challenges that we just identified. So our work at Golden involves us applying a lot of those skills when we're working with our clients. But I don't want to just talk about what we're doing. So most of these, I'm going to pull some examples and highlight instances. A lot of times we work with engineers, energy managers in a range of organizations. So I'm going to pull some examples from them around things that we've either witnessed them doing or helped them achieve. And I just want to remind everyone that if you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to, I think there's a raise hand button in Zoom that you can use in the toolbar at the bottom, or feel free to put any questions into the chat. I'll have some, a Q&A at the end, but if anything comes up as we go, feel free to jump in. So the first one is art of facilitation. This is one that I really like. We had an engineer, an energy manager who was struggling to get the participation and support they needed from their energy team. One of the best practices in reducing energy emissions is having like a cross-departmental team start integrating that change through the organization. But changing the culture or operations of an organization means getting people involved. And if you're trying to enact some kind of technical change that's going to impact a lot of people, but you only have this kind of like exclusive one-way communication talking to them, but not stuff coming back, that's usually a pretty big red flag that you're maybe not making the progress you need to be. And this was the situation with this energy team. The energy manager was doing a lot of the talking, not getting a lot back from the team. So you need to be able to engage people, make them comfortable sharing their opinions, generate discussion, and start fostering those real contributions. And in this case, for this energy manager, it meant learning about the strategies of effective facilitation. Like, how do you identify shared values? How do you call out those unspoken barriers that are keeping people from participating, and agreeing on a group, as a group, on the expectations of the team? We also help them bring in some theory around the stages of team development to understand some of the psychology that's going into the stage that they were currently at, so that they could focus on specific strategies to overcome those challenges and improve the effectiveness of the team. The other one is bringing others along for the ride. And the challenges that, we saw the challenges around buy-in. I think someone mentioned marketing. That's a big thing as well. I mentioned before with the energy team, cross-departmental, these big changes, it's not working in a silo. You have to bring the organization along, the whole organization. We've done some work with a hospital sustainability team, and they had a great internal reputation through the success that they've done, sort of reducing energy, saving money. But they want to step up the challenge to meet the challenge of climate change, which requires a much more integrated approach, stronger commitment from leadership, and understanding the technical opportunities and limitations was critical. So that engineering side of it, but talking to leadership and getting that buy-in and bringing other people along requires a different message. You need to align that technical solution side with their priorities. And for hospital, typically their priorities are around reputation, resiliency, and risk. So how do you align the technical solutions or what needs to be done on that side with those priorities that they're focused on at the leadership level? And presenting the business case or the proposal in a manner that's clear, concise, focuses on the priorities of the audience, what they need to hear, what they need to understand, is critical to getting that support and buy-in. I know in general, from myself and what I've seen in people that we work with and engineers that we work with, we have a tendency we love problem solving, and we love showing how we've gotten through the problems and through the technical side of stuff. But as soon as we start talking to other people, we need to remember it's like, that's the appendix. That's not the core message. The core message is, what is the value? How does this align with what you're trying to accomplish? And being able to communicate that in a very clear and concise manner to get that buy-in and to bring people along. Always be closing. I think like marketing came up as one of those challenges. And we've definitely seen energy managers, engineers who struggled to get those projects approved. Projects that would save money, would save energy, would reduce emissions. But telling an industrial plant manager how many kilowatt hours a project's going to save is unlikely to generate a lot of interest. And we often find that energy managers and engineers kind of get shoved into the need to play a role of an internal entrepreneur within their organization to sell management on projects and initiatives. And it means learning and applying those sales techniques. Like I mentioned, concise, value-focused language, focusing on addressing immediate pain points that they have, generating FOMO, the fear of missing out, are our competitors are doing this. We don't want to be the ones left behind not doing this. And removing those barriers to make it easier for them to say yes. Learning those sales techniques makes a huge difference, even in like broader technically focused companies. One of my favorites was they were getting a runaround on a project that had a 1-year payback. So that's a good payback, but it was just not seen as a priority. Like excellent project in terms of financials, just wasn't seen as a big priority. So eventually he went forward to the facility GM and said, look, I seem to be having trouble getting budget for this project, but it's a 1-year payback. That means that we're going to pay for this project this year, whether we do it or not. But if we don't do it this year, we're going to pay for it again next year and the year after that and the year after that until we actually do the project. That grabbed the attention. That was a really great sales pitch that helped get the project moving forward. Another one that I really love, I have a fondness for data visualization. So using pretty pictures, prizes, gamification. We had a great example just from this past year where an energy manager using graphical dashboards and the info screens that they had around their manufacturing facility. So a lot of times we see engineers or people in charge of reducing energy emissions struggle to generate results because the goal or target is disconnected from people's actions and what they can relate to. So, the goal or the target's either too far away, thinking it's like, 2050 target, or it's too high up. Here's our organization target, but what does that mean for me and my department? Or it's too abstract. Reduce kilowatt hours. A lot of operators, management really don't grasp what kilowatt hours. What's a lot? What's a little? It's a little bit abstract in that sense. So this energy manager overcame those challenges. They focused on a specific area. In this case, it was how much energy the facility consumed when production wasn't running. So overnight, weekends, they were still consuming a lot of energy, even though they weren't really doing anything. And then they provided clear information through visualization on those screens. So, having a graphic up there that was like, here's where your department energy consumption is. It needs to get below this line before you leave for the weekend. And then provided specific actions that they could implement to get there. So like a specific checklist that they could run through that would help them get that below the line, the energy consumption below the line. And then obviously, celebrating, providing recognition to those departments that did well. So sometimes, those psychological approaches that, keep people addicted to their phones and playing games on those, sometimes those can help save energy or achieve these other goals as well. The other skill I think is incredibly important when tackling change is networking and building relationships. So I think that came up in the answers that everyone provided earlier as well. We had one engineer who struggled to get traction on projects, and they worked at a mine, and there's a lot of between the shift work and underground, above ground, the different facilities, the different areas, even getting a hold of people to discuss projects or opportunities was a challenge, let alone getting them on board with that change. So technical change of any size is going to involve a range of stakeholders. And investing that time in building relationships with people, getting to know them, what they care about, and establishing that trust before you need to ask them for something can make a really big difference. So ultimately, organizational change comes down to individual change, just multiplied. So the more you know about those individuals, the more prepared you're going to be. And I know we had another energy manager. They had a rule of at least once a week having lunch with a different person who in the organization from a different department, someone more senior or that they maybe wouldn't regularly interact with, but having lunch with someone who would likely become a stakeholder on one of their projects at some point. And they did this not just to start building some useful relationships and getting people to know them and what was going and to educate them about energy management and efficiency, but it also helped them develop an understanding of what other people's priorities were, so that when they did come to them with a proposal or a project, they were better able to align that project or that proposal with that person's existing priorities, and also better able to anticipate where there might be pushback on there and address those sort of barriers up front. I see a comment that the issue with the idea of sales techniques, treat people as dollar signs, not proper way to influence. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think, you know, the dollar signs are important. Understanding some financial metrics beyond simple payback, another area as well. But I think a lot of it comes down to, like I said, that understanding their values, their priorities, their pain points. I've seen organizations where there was a winery I was worked with a number of years ago, and they were looking at a clean in place system, and it was, you know, good payback, the dollars made sense, good environmental impact, lots of water reduction, reduced chemicals. Business case was solid. They just didn't see it as a priority, so they were like kind of wish-washy or you know, non-committal to it. But then we pointed out that it's like, hey, if you put this clean in place system in, your staff no longer have to do confined space entry. And that is what clicked with them, because that was like by far the biggest health and safety risk within their organization, within their facility. And if they eliminated that need, you know, it's not that just the dollars and cents side of it, but that was like that touched their values, their priorities. And then it was like a no-brainer to go ahead with it. So I think that's a really interesting point there, where, you know, the dollars are important. We always recommend, like, dollars are better than kilowatt hours or, you know, cubic meters of natural gas or what have you. But if you can nail in those pain points or those values that they really care about, that makes a big difference. And the last one that we use is teaching, training, and how do you communicate concepts, ideas, and what needs to be done in terms of change in an effective way. We work with a sustainability team at, you know, this national, multinational company that had facilities across North America, and it was sort of a central corporate team that was responsible for reducing emissions across dozens of sites. So, as I mentioned before, the kinds of challenges that we're looking to address, they can't be solved by an engineer, an energy manager, even like that team on their own. It is an organizational challenge to address. And when going through this change, people are going to need to learn how to do things differently and why they need to do that differently and what's involved in it, what's in it for them. And if you want to be effective in supporting that change, you or someone in your organization better be ready to help them learn and understand that new approach effectively. And in our work, we frequently deal with facility or equipment operators that are very good at doing their job, ensuring reliability, quality, safety, comfort, but energy or emissions management was just never part of those priorities. So they need to learn how do they do that job while incorporating these other considerations. So understanding, you know, principles of adult learning. How do you involve people so that they bring their expertise to the learning and integrate the new learning with what they already know and those skills they already have? That can go a long way towards helping staff and people in your organization transition. So between the list of, you know, challenges we all generated and those examples, and where you feel your strengths and weaknesses lie, this may seem a bit daunting. There's a lot of different skills that go into this, and some of them are more specialized, like, you know, training versus facilitation versus those sales and the relationship building. And they're often things that seem a bit curious to learn. But not everyone, I kind of want to, like, on the daunting side, not everyone needs to be able to do all of this. And I don't think that would be reasonable. We kind of have this, when we work with energy managers, we kind of have this matrix of like, hey, here's the skills of a super energy manager. You're not going to be doing all of these. But I don't think that would be reasonable. But I do think it's very important to be aware of when these skills are needed, and getting beyond just that umbrella of better communications to looking at some of those, sub areas and sectors. So when are those needed so that you can focus your professional development efforts on the ones that'll help you the most, or at the very least, be aware of them to ensure that those skills are part of your team, or it's not something that's holding you back or your efforts back. So what I want everyone to do now is think about your current role or a role you are interested in pursuing, and think about, like, how does your team provide value? What are some of those non-technical barriers that you face? Which of some of the skills that we just discussed are relevant to that role? And which ones may be gaps within the team that you're working with? So just trying to narrow down. And what I would like you to do is write down or type, post a note, whatever you have nearby, but write down one or two of those non-technical skills that came up earlier that you think would be particularly helpful to you and your role. So what are ones that have either come up against some of those challenges before, and you want to build some of these skills to help overcome those, or you see those as opportunities for you to contribute your team in a way that's going to really provide some of those values. So I want everyone to kind of think of one or two of those. And if anyone is willing to share those, I'd really encourage, go off mic, type into the chat. I'd love to hear which ones of these or any of these sort of skills that we've been talking about maybe resonate in your experience or within your position or role. We get any volunteers may want to unmute and share any of these that they see would be particularly useful in their situation. I'll give a couple of seconds for people to find the mute button on there before we go on. Okay, but if you don't want to share, that's fine. If you're not comfortable unmuting, please put them in the chat, or at the very least, keep them in mind, because the next section we're going to talk about is what are, like, at a kind of a high level, what are some of the things that you can do to start developing those skills. We do have a response: facilitation and data visualization. Oh, those are some of my favorites. Those are two that I really enjoy, and I have some resources on those that'll be good as well. Those ones I found. Facilitation is a curious one. A lot of I feel, compared to some of the other ones, like the communication, speaking to values, the sales stuff, the facilitation one is a little bit more niche, but I find it really satisfying when you're sort of directing a room of people and helping them come to a conclusion or directions or way forward on areas. I find that really satisfying, and data visualization is just really interesting as well. All right, so if anyone else wants to share those in the chat, please go ahead. But then I'm going to move on to, how can you develop these skills? So as I mentioned before, depending on your situation, your goal might range. You may not want to focus on all of these, and it might range from maybe you want to become really proficient in that area because you see that providing a lot of value to your role or what you want to accomplish. But some areas, you maybe don't need to. Maybe you just want to know enough about that to be able to know what's good. Just as an example, Arden mentioned data visualization there. As I mentioned, that's I really love that area, and reading and learning about that. But it is something that, if I'm honest with myself, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to spend the time that I would need to put in it to get really good at Photoshop or whatever to create really great fancy infographics. That's not necessarily the best use of my time when I look at where my priorities lie. But learning about some of the concepts and principles and best practices around data visualization, I can take those lessons to improve the clarity of, charts or graphs that I make in Excel and PowerPoint slides. So I can still apply those in a more basic way, but a way that does help promote clarity, that helps communicate key points. And it also helps me understand when it would be really useful for me to hire, say, a graphic designer to take it to that next level of when that's needed as well. So I think that's a good example of some of these skills you may be using more frequently and you want to get good at them. Other ones you just kind of want some awareness around them. The first one, which may seem obvious, is training. There are so many courses available out there online, in person, at universities that are really useful. I think some of the challenges, people maybe don't know what are the courses or the training that they need. So hopefully, like, breaking down that broad communications into some of those specific streams, that can sometimes help identify those. A lot of what we talked about earlier falls under this kind of sub-umbrella of change management. So how do you manage the people side? Like, there's the project manager that does the technical side of change. How do you manage the people side of change to help people understand, why do I need to change? What's in it for me? What's involved in it? How do I develop the skills around that? ProSci is an organization that does really excellent training on change management. I would highly recommend them. In terms of, there's piles of communications and courses and training involved. There's a fellow locally in Toronto, Misha Globerman, he does these courses on they're called How to Talk to People About Things, but really they're courses about negotiation, having difficult conversations. And those are really excellent. I'd really recommend those as well. Facilitation, Arden, you mentioned that. There's a fellow, Roger Schwartz, who is really great in terms of courses and reading on that. So I think part of that challenge with training is not necessarily finding training, because there's courses all over, but maybe finding the good ones. But how do you find like that? How do you zero in on it? So putting some thought into what are those specific skills you want to develop, and then having that guide your training. Online and print resources are so much available out there. A lot of what we talked about, especially like talking to leadership, getting buy-in, they're like Harvard Business Review and Forbes, they do a lot of articles sort of covering that kind of material. In terms of written communication, the book on here says it's a classic guide, and I would definitely recommend this as a classic guide on writing well. This is one that I read early in my career, and it does a really great job of helping understand how to use clarity, brevity, getting to that point in a way that communicates concepts and ideas. Books by Edward Tufte, he's sort of very well known in terms of data visualization. Those books are beautiful, even if you don't get into it. So I definitely recommend them. They're amazing coffee table books, but also very informative. Other online resources, finding templates for a lot of this stuff. We talked about, sales techniques, sales approaches. One of those big ones is the one-page proposal. You get the information that is needed for someone to make a decision onto one page, have that up front. There's lots of templates for these online that are really helpful. All of that engineering analysis and calculations and research and stuff that supports that decision, as I said, that's the appendix. The one page is, all right, here's what I need to know to convince someone that this is needed, that there's benefits, and that it's something that they should say yes to. So there's lots of templates for all these things that we sort of talked about as well. The next one is finding those experts. So there's a lot of people that you can learn from. On here, we've got Mark Jewell. He runs Selling Energy Efficiency, which he teaches sales techniques specifically for energy efficiency professionals. And blog, books, does courses. Similar, Roger Schwartz, I mentioned him. He has a book called The Skilled Facilitator. He also does online and in-person courses for that. There's Cole Nussbaumer Nafik, who does storytelling with data as a blog and also training as well. And then last I have up there is Shola K, who does a lot of like advice, blog, etc. on public speaking, presentations, how to get better at those. So a lot of, if you can find experts in those areas, and a lot of them have blogs and newsletters that send out tips. So that's great to sort of like get on an ongoing basis. I love, just like having, a lot of them will have like, hey, here's the tip of the week related to it. So it's really useful to, if there's those areas that you've identified, those one or two that you wrote down, try to find who those experts are. Here's some examples. If you're looking for anything else, let me know. The second last one is leveraging your own network. So, there's the experts that are out there, is that broad public network that can help you, but look for peers, supervisors, people in your organization that you think are good at this, that you think have an eye for these different areas, for these skills. Ask them for feedback, advice, find a mentor that can help provide that advice in there. Leverage your team as well. That's a big thing. I mentioned you may not be developing all these skills, but being aware of them so you know when to bring in someone who has that skill set or leverage that within your organization. And the other thing I would advise when you're looking at your immediate network, to not just, is to watch them. So not just what they're doing, but also how they do it. Years ago, we do a lot of training. So, I've taken courses on, like train the trainer courses on, here's how you deliver effective participant-centered training. And one thing that's really interesting there is they're teaching, like the content of the course is how do you become a better trainer, but you also because they're applying those best practices to training you to be a better trainer. So watch how people are doing. So when you see people who are facilitating, pay attention to how they are engaging people, how they are reacting to people. Really watch the details. Because then you start picking things up. I know I mentioned Misha Gloverman, who does communications workshops and training. He's a professional facilitator. I learned a lot just from watching him. And at first I was like, he's just charismatic. He is just naturally good at this. Then I started picking up, it's like, no, he's being very intentional. And there are specific things that he is doing to be a good facilitator. So try to look for those details of people who are doing these skills well. And then the last one is practice. So these are all skills, you can read about them online, you can, take those courses, but ultimately it's coming down to practice. So you need to look for and take opportunities to practice these skills. You can start with low stakes things like, hey, can I facilitate our team meeting? Hey, I just went to this webinar and I want to brief our team on the key takeaways and learning. So can I do a quick presentation on that or a lunch and learn? Can I prep the business case for this project? Can I take the first draft at it and get that feedback? So start with those low stakes ones and make sure you're getting input and feedback. And immediately, so like you finish a presentation and you ask me, how did that go? What went well? What did I do well? What could I improve on? Be very proactive in asking for that feedback because that's going to drive your improvement. And lastly, if there's maybe limited opportunities within your organization to get that practice, you can look externally. So I know lots of people who have done Toastmasters as a way to practice public speaking, presenting, or even non-work situations, whether like in volunteer opportunities. I know a lot of people who have like gotten into improv as a hobby, and they found that really helpful in a lot of these sort of facilitation, communication, getting buy-in from people. It builds your kind of thinking on your feet skills. So that's been really helpful for a lot of people as well. So I hope through this we've identified, okay, there's the challenges, here's kind of the range of skills, and diving in a little bit beyond, okay, this is just communications, but there's specifics within that. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas of what you might be able to do to start building or improving those skills. We have some time left. I'd love to open it up to questions. So any questions about what we've covered, some of those skills, things that, you know, Golfin or myself, we've seen in applying those in organizations, where to go for some of this help. Would love to hear your comments, feedback on that, or if you have any questions at all. And you can put those in, again, put those in the chat if you want, if that's more comfortable. But also, if you want to unmute yourself, I'd love to take any questions that you may have.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Yeah. I am Tijani, sir. Yeah, I want to ask that this because actually I came a bit late.
Oh, did you freeze there? Oh no, came in a bit late, and one person, of course, with my luck,
I was
one
having
person.
my
Oh,
test. Then
I'm
I
sorry.
want to ask, can we have this? I want to ask, can we have the record of this sent to our mail so that we can go over it so that we catch up with it?
Sorry, the audio was a little bit choppy there. Could you repeat that?
I said, can we have the record of the webinar in our mail so that we can go over it?
Yeah, so I think NEM is putting the recordings of all of these online. So yeah, if you did come in late and missed any of the upfront stuff, you can, that'll be available as well. So I think they're posting that up online following the session. Okay. We do have some time for those questions. So if anyone does have anything they'd like to ask, please feel free to jump in and interrupt me. I have one last thing to cover, one last sort of little activity. But before I do that, I would like to thank, you know, National Engineering Month for the opportunity to present some of, you know, the work and the experiences that we have at Golfin, and also through National Engineering Month, thanking some of the partners on there, Humber's Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technologies, a lot of the champion partners who contributed to making this month and all of the great events that are happening through here a reality, the ally partners as well, and lastly, the advocate partners. So as I mentioned, Jay Mullen from Golden Consulting, if there's anything that did come up or you want to follow up on, please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to share that. Like if there are any of those kind of specific sources or trainers or anything like that that you are interested in, please feel free to let me know.
Hi there. So I don't have a question, but I do want to kind of contribute to your presentation a little bit, and thank you for the presentation. In addition to being an engineer, I'm also a professor of public policy in a graduate program for public policy administration. And two of the courses that I teach, one is community psychology, and the other one is advocacy strategy and tactics. And in advocacy, I actually teach storytelling. And so I think that it is interesting to kind of add to what you say in your presentation too. I think that in order to tell a good story, what's really important is to understand what the dominant assumptions are, to understand the audience, what their dominant assumptions are, because the purpose of telling a story is to challenge those assumptions, is to basically move understanding. That's the whole idea of why we tell stories. And the key thing for people about stories is not so much just the facts or the truths, but it's the meaning of the story. So that's why people love stories. That's why we are narrative animals as humans, is because that we love to connect, we love to make meanings of things, even though they might not be true. So as engineers, I think that it's very natural for us, or very habitual for us, to just throw the facts at people.
Mhm.
And it is important to understand that just throwing the facts at people, at your audience, doesn't mean that they're going to buy in, because if those facts don't have meanings to them, they are going to block it off. It's what's called narrative filters, that basically we just don't listen because that they don't align with our values. So it is important for us to understand that when we tell a story, when we want to challenge those assumptions, it's important to get around those filters. So if someone believe in, ABC, there's no, it's not value added for us to tell them that ABC is wrong, or that your assumptions are wrong. So instead of telling them that's wrong, so maybe that, well, if this is what you believe to be true, then let's look at an alternative that would also tell you that ABC might be true, but it's an alternative.
Yeah, and I think that like both in the story, I think storytelling is a very powerful tool in there, and it comes up in a lot of the stuff that we talked about, like in selling, the power of storytelling, data visualization. I think one of the experts that I put up there, her blog is just storytelling through data. I think that's like the name of it, and that's super powerful. But I think also your point around assumptions is really great. We've and I kind of touched at this at the high level, but getting to understand people and building those relationships so you understand your audience, their priorities, what their assumptions are, what their misconceptions are. We've seen things where I also like your point about, as engineers, we often say it's like, look, the data, the facts, they make sense. How could anyone say no? But so much of it does come down to presenting and aligning with people's assumptions. I've seen instances where people pitch a really great business case, but then the audience, the decision maker, has some assumption around why this isn't going to work. And sometimes it's like technical, or it's like, oh, it's going to decrease reliability, or it's going to, like, I heard that this happens sometimes. And if you present that amazing business case and all the benefits, but you don't address that assumption, then because you weren't aware of that, then you're going to hit a wall. And it doesn't matter what the payback is. If he assumes it's like, oh yeah, but I heard from, my cousins, whatever, that they did this and it, like, their production went down for 2 days. It's like, okay, you're never going to overcome that assumption unless, like, if you don't, like, through other things. Like, the payback could be whatever, but if you're running into that wall there. So I think that idea of understanding your audience and having those conversations, and the skills to kind of pull out what are their assumptions, what are their reservations, and being able to address that through narratives or those other tools that you have. I think that's incredibly important, and that's one of the challenging things as well. It's also like you end up spinning your wheels. You could give an amazing 30-minute presentation pitch and not touch on that one thing, and you just wasted your whole time doing it because you didn't address that one assumption.
So one thing that thank you for adding to that. One thing that I would encourage engineering colleagues to remember when they're telling stories is that remember why people love Disney. People love Disney is because it's not because the stories are true, right? Nobody says that Snow White is true, Cinderella's true, Pinocchio is true. But people love stories because that they have meaning to them. They mean something. There's a point to the story. So there's a moral to the story. So as long as we remember that when we tell a story, the main currency of that story is the meaning. So if we can get through to that meaning, then that is the best way to move understanding, to challenge those assumptions. I think that would be the best way to influence decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point as well. And as I mentioned, like, if you start diving into, I mentioned like those sort of different sub areas under that umbrella of communication, but a lot of them end up sort of pulling from that and other psychological things as well to really sort of pull that across. All right, I've got one last little activity, but before I dive in there, anyone else have anything that they'd like to add or any questions at all? Okay. thank you very much for your time. And my one last question is, based on what we talked about today, identifying some of those skills that can be really valuable in navigating technical change, some of those ways that you can go about developing, practicing those skills, what are you going to do in the next week-ish to start improving those skills? What's that first step that you're going to take? I asked everyone to write down one or two of those skill areas, or those areas that they'd like to develop further. What's one step that you're going to take in that journey? So to answer the questions, if you can go to menti.com on your browser, on your phone, and enter the code at the top of the page, 33068960, and would love to hear what you're going to do to, that next step in that lifelong learning. That's the theme of this week's National Engineering Month. While people are entering their answers, I would like to again thank National Engineering Month for hosting me today, all of the partners and sponsors that made National Engineering Month possible. Thank you to Bruce for the introduction, and for Ms. Lena for all the help in setting this up, and to everyone else for their time today in joining me. Hopefully you got something useful out of this. So that sort of wraps up my presentation. We've got a few minutes left. I'll stick around both to see what people are entering in this last question, and also if you do have any other questions or comments, would love to hear those as well. But thank you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of National Engineering Month.